So, how can big sleep data provide physicians and consumers more precise healthcare diagnoses and treatment? I couldn't be more privileged to introduce our next keynote. You know him as Dr. Oz on TV, but his drive and leadership in digital health is moving the needle forward on so many different levels. I'd like to welcome Dr. Mehmet Oz back to the Digital Health Summit stage. Thank you.
Bless you. It's always a blessing to be here, in part because I get so much feedback after these conversations. And I tell you often, and I give a firm number of talks, oftentimes the last time you see folks is when you finish on the podium. But I love the fact many of you reach out afterwards, you follow up, you have your own insights, you disagree, so keep that going. I'm gonna provoke you a little bit today, speaking about what I believe is the number one most underappreciated problem we have in America, which is sleep. And I'm actually doing the Today Show tomorrow morning, so I've got to leave just after this talk. But on the show tomorrow, I'm going to talk specifically about the role of sleep in something I call System 20, which is a whole different way of thinking about your lifestyle shifts. And everyone wants to focus on weight loss. And I'll say to you what I'm going to say tomorrow, which is the best way to lose weight is to sleep, for two reasons. You can't eat while you're sleeping, usually. But it turns out that not sleeping is one of the best ways to provoke your hunger center, especially provoke the desire to have carbohydrates. And we've all been there, especially if you're jet lagged like many of you are. In order to keep your brain going, you'll consume carbs. Similarly, late in the afternoon, why is the bewitching hour at 4 o'clock? Because your brain is tired from having made decisions all day, so you feed it carbs to keep going, which is why even things like napping make a difference. So what is the problem? Why are we having such a difficult time getting people to think about sleep the right way, fixing problems they're having with sleep, and people like me, doctors, not interacting with their sleep in the right way? Because we're failing in America. We're going in the wrong direction. I would argue that sleep data can boldly accelerate what we have called precision medicine, which is my ability to look at you specifically and say, based on what I'm seeing in your data and putting that in the context of a lot of people around you, here's what the opportunity might be for you. So with that in mind, let's talk about how serious sleep is. I assume my mic's okay over here? You all hear me? Good. So sleep is a big time problem for a couple reasons, but I'll just give you some hard data on it. And we're in the middle of a political campaign, and you're hearing people talk about Medicare for all, or more than Medicare for all, or knocking down Obamacare, or nothing at all. I mean, it doesn't frankly matter which side of the aisle you're on, because the sleep is a nonpartisan, ubiquitous issue that is going to destroy any health solution you may have offered from Washington or any state capital. Why is it serious? 1 out of 3 people sleep less than the recommended 7 hours. That's not even the crisis number for me, 6 is. But 1 out of 3 people is a lot of people. Turns out that 1 in 3 people in America are pre-diabetic. 1 in 3 people are pre-hypertensive or hypertensive. So those numbers seem to come up a fair amount, that 1 out of 3 number. And it's interesting to look into the details of why it's there, because it's so expensive when you're 1 of those 3 people. If you go from being a pre-diabetic to a diabetic, it will cost your insurance company $7,000 that year and every other year afterwards, unless you can address the diabetes. One of the best ways to deal with diabetes is to sleep so you can lose some of the weight, reboot your metabolic system, and actually, without having to be on high-dose insulin for the rest of your life, address a problem that we know for many Americans could be reversible, or folks around the world, same data. And in parts of the world like Asia, where genetically people are at risk of diabetes, it is devastating to their economies, and it will become progressively more so over time. Now, 1 in 3 people don't sleep. Let's look at the numbers around, specifically around that is, the prevalence. In this country, and I have similar data for around the world, it's sort of interesting. The darker the color, the more people aren't sleeping. So find your state and lament the reality of our problem. But the issue isn't the link just between poor sleep and chronic illness. It's specifically, why is it happening? Now, this vision of this country, just memorize it. You'll notice the dark blue, a lot of it's in the southeast and in eastern areas of this country. The mountainous areas seem to do okay when it comes to sleep, comparatively speaking. It's still a number that's 3 out of 10 instead of being 4 or 5 out of 10. But let's lay this over the incidence of being overweight, and it's shocking, right? Prevalence of obesity over a BMI of 35, right? And these are huge numbers about huge people. I mean, and it becomes a problem because these people don't want to be overweight, and they're desperately trying to lose weight, and they're flailing. And I would argue one of the reasons they're suffering is because they haven't figured sleep out, because it's never been told to them, right? America hasn't gotten the message about sleep because we haven't told them. They haven't gotten it because we've not given it to them in a way that's accessible. And one of the best ways to deal with a very intimate and a very lonely experience because you're by yourself when you sleep. When you wake up at 3 in the morning and you stare at the black ceiling above you and try not to wake up the people you care about, it's really a problem emotionally. But these numbers overlap fairly consistently, which again ties these two epidemics together. So doctors should be dealing with this, but we don't. And why don't we deal with it? Because we only have a little bit of the picture. We have the part you tell us about if you volunteer it. And I'll tell you something as a physician. How many physicians are here, or nurses or healthcare professionals? Right. I think you all agree. We love getting good grades, right? And you don't get good grades without data. So if you don't know what to study, you're not going to take the test, you're not going to do well. So if the patient doesn't volunteer us concrete data, or if it's very ambiguous, I don't sleep so well sometimes. I don't want to even go down that road because I'm not going to do well trying to give them advice. So because we only have part of the picture, we got to deal with it. And the self-reported data we do get is actually misleading. And the worst information in the hospital is not an absence of information. It's misleading information that makes me think the patient's okay and they're really not. This is the kind of data we'll get. I only slept 3 hours last night. Well, really? Is that all? Or maybe you got more and you thought you didn't sleep, or you're awakened all the time. Or did you wake up a lot and maybe didn't even realize you're waking up, right? So how do we actually put numbers on these things? And I would argue that we can do better, a lot better than the current status. But we're only going to get there if we start getting smart about data, because it should include objective measurements, but they're not being gathered and educated and put together in bundles that doctors can understand. Let's compare this to a typical examination of a patient in an office, right? You know what the temperature is. First question I'll ask you if you think you had chills. You know what the heart rate is. You all know your blood pressure, I hope, right? Number one cause of aging is high blood pressure. It is, by the way, caused by insomnia. If you don't know why your blood pressure is high, think about that as the first cause. Breathing rates, we have numbers for all these things. But what about the fifth vital sign, which should not be pain, it should be sleep. How much are you sleeping? And how do we put a number on that? Well, I want to talk about that very issue because it's all about accuracy. When we look at sleep journal data, self-reported data, it's notoriously unreliable, not surprisingly, because you were asleep for most of it. And when you wake up half doused and you're not quite sure where you are, and you had a little too much to drink last night, or you're jet lagged, and you don't put the numbers in the right spot, well, no wonder the data becomes so unreliable that we don't use it. However, if you compare a typical scenario to an accurate assessment, which now we have tools that do this is a sleep score app, then you've got a consumer finally giving their doctors, getting themselves real hardcore data. In this case, you didn't sleep for 3 hours, or rather for 6.5 hours. You slept for 5.5 hours. You lay awake there for 4 hours, not realizing because the clock was ticking, you were drowsy. So what do you do with this? When you compare them head to head, you finally begin to find trends, things that might allow you to clue in to why you're not sleeping some nights and you're doing better on other nights. And how do you bundle those together in a way that allows a clinician or a patient or a company making a solution for sleep to finally be able to say authoritatively, hey, I've got a better answer, a better mousetrap for the problem that you're facing. So with that, this is the opportunity that I want to highlight, the opportunity of consumer tech. Now, Sleep Score Max, when I first came here years ago and started talking about it, was this beautiful little device on the side of your bed that would keep track of how you were sleeping without touching you, and was incredibly reliable. It still is probably the world's most advanced sleep improvement center. It evolved in the Sleep Score, which if you take your phone and look at the bottom of your phone, there's that little audio panel on the bottom. We actually can put a sonar beam out from there, like a porpoise would, and watch you sleep, which means we can figure out if you're moving or not, or breathing at the right rate for sleep or not, or is your leg restless, or are you in sleep apnea? These become tools or diagnoses we can begin to wander into just by watching you all night long with the bottom of your phone sending out that sonar beam. And then you can look at things like, do you snore? Because we're tracking that. All of a sudden, you've got the best device, most reliable coach in your hand, your phone, on the bedstand, able to collect the information effortlessly. So the homework goes away. And this is the kind, when I look across and I've invested in a lot of these spaces, and I've started some of these companies, and the prior presentation beautifully outlined some of the thoughts. This is the number one for me. I don't want to have extra hardware purchased by folks if it's avoidable. Sometimes you have no choice. But this makes something ubiquitously available so you can get lots of numbers. Now, what do you do with those numbers? Well, you do something bold. Now, all of a sudden, you move from self-reported data to something that is big. It's not just about you, it's also about you, but not just about you. It's big, it's objective, it's longitudinal, and the data is reliable. Vetted in clinical trials and shown to be similar enough to a sleep study in a lab that you might say, my goodness, I'm going to use that as a thumbnail of what's going on, because I can't get you in a sleep lab. And if I did get you in a sleep lab, that's not really real world experiences. So this kind of technology now all of a sudden jumpstart a discussion, a conversation in a doctor's office that was never previously possible in our history, but it's starting to happen in a very big way. So how do we use big objective longitudinal data? Well, a lot of it's about making sure that you're moving from small subjective self-measurement to big numbers. So we've got 50 million hours of data. It's a lot of numbers. And we can start to figure out a lot of things, especially with some of the artificial intelligence technologies that we're using. It's going to be objectively measured, not the recall of the patient. You want more data points every time something new happens, so we can look at an election and how poorly people sleep, or after New Year's Day, is sleep disrupted in a meaningful way? Right? All that allows us to give clues to how to manage things like daylight savings time. But at the end, it really is about an ease of gathering of lots of data. Now, what do you do with that specifically? I'll give you an example. So one of the things we want to do is start to create charts that really describe people's sleep. This looks like a tie or a dress, but it's actually a way of assessing how someone is sleeping. You have more nights, more people, more data, and you can actually look at people who are healthy and people who are not healthy. A healthy, active person will have this kind of sleep pattern. Now, what does it mean specifically? Well, there's numbers that you can gather. And on the right side of this curve, you see things like REM and deep sleep and light sleep you're familiar with. On the left, you see waking after falling asleep, or just numbers of times you wake in period. And you can start to pull together data. In fact, more specifically, you can look at poor sleep parameters and good sleep parameters. And now you can begin to chart what you look like in a very visual way, in fact, a visually arresting way. So let's move away from healthy, active adults to, for example, inactive seniors who have health issues. That's what their histogram, so to speak, looks like, right? That's what their chart looks like. It's more like a bow tie, right? You don't want that. So the closer your body data is telling us that you're in this category, and this is objective. You don't have to do anything but just keep the phone on. In fact, if you do nothing, it'll work. And you can go much deeper into categories, right? Seniors who are in good health look like the blue. These could look like states too, but it's like a Rorschach test. Figure out what you think it looks like and find yourself in there. But you won't be able to populate the data if you haven't gathered it with a device that's capable of doing so. And once you know where you are, and I'm going to highlight something to you here, smokers, see them in the bottom? I'll come back to them in a second. Notice how dysmorphic, how disfigured that curve is, that graph. And it tells us that smoking really, really affects the quality of someone's sleep. It's a clue to you that I did not put coffee on this chart, because it's not as disfigured as you might expect. I'll come back to that in a second. But it starts to allow us to treat you like an adult. These are big problems, these are small problems. Let's build solutions for the big problems and ignore the small ones. So, to do this right, you'll all of a sudden be able to gather tons of information without actually touching the person. Again, it's an effortlessness that allows us to sing. And you'll look at noise and light, things that are done already with other apps, but do them all together with a much more precise way of looking at the subtleness of how the body moves. And by not touching it, you're not interrupting it. Right? The Heisenberg uncertainty principle. If you wrap me all up in stuff like in a sleep lab, I don't do my normal sleep. So when you do this, all of a sudden you start to see that early screening makes a difference. It makes a big difference. So put the sleep data together with the report. The doctors can now analyze real data because we can do something about it, and then you start to lower healthcare costs. That chart of the country that I showed you earlier is emblematic of that, because obesity is the single number and most important driver of the healthcare expense in this country, which is why if you fix that, which sleep will help do in a big way, it doesn't matter what political solution you find. They'll all work. But if we don't fix that, none of them are going to be there. So the interventions start to vary. So let's think about this in an organized way. Here's what the data is telling us. And this you might want to take a picture of, because you can either defend your actions, your habits, or you can attack others because of theirs. So night-to-night association of alcohol, caffeine, and nicotine intake. This is the most common question I get asked. Notice, alcohol use within 4 hours of bedtime costs me about 3.5 minutes. Doesn't sound like a lot, but a sleeping pill gives you about 8 to 10 minutes. So put it in the context of where the real value is here. Sleeping pills in the right setting are fantastic, but if they're overused, as they often are, it's a real problem for this country. The sleep amount is not that much, and it's disfigured sleep. Right? I didn't put mattresses on here, but mattresses actually give you about 20 minutes sometimes. So a good bed is actually a pretty important investment to make for most Americans, but people ignore it. But getting back to this graph. So alcohol use, you lose 3.5. Caffeine use, you're only losing a minute. And since coffee is the #1 antioxidant consumed in America, I tell you, drink coffee. Now, I say that, and I'm going to claim I'm unbiased because I actually personally don't drink coffee because I have one of those genetic abnormalities that 1 in 7 of us have that makes me hypersensitive to caffeine. So I start bouncing off walls, and in surgery, it's the worst because your hand starts to shake, and even worse, you have to go to the bathroom. And it's often number 2. So it's the worst thing. You're in there boving along, trying to sew things together, and you have to go to the bathroom, which is, uncool. In any case. So sleep duration, caffeine doesn't cost you much, but look at nicotine. The amount of sleep you lose from smoking cigarettes, and we don't know about vaping, but it might be involved here too because it's the nicotine that's the issue probably, right? But look at that. That's more lost sleep than a sleeping pill gives you on average. It's a big deal. And this is not subjective data. This is the objective information that we've gathered, millions of nights of sleep, right? Awake time. In minutes. How long does it take for you to wake up after you've slept? And these are normative numbers, so I don't use those. But when you drink alcohol, you will awaken usually in the evening, and the numbers of times you awaken is a lot higher than if you are than if you're a coffee drinker. So again, alcohol lets you fall asleep, but you'll awaken in the middle of the night a lot more frequently than you would have normally, and that's why alcohol is a problem late at night, more than coffee is. And nicotine, again, messes with everything. You keep waking up. And then sleep efficiency, just putting a number on there. You lose a little bit from alcohol. You lose almost nothing from caffeine. Nicotine is the big culprit. All right, so let's move into, obviously, the red is the area you want to warn your folks about. So I think when we look at problems like insomnia, you have to look at the puzzle pieces. And the puzzle pieces aren't as obvious as we thought they were, but they are obvious if you have the right data to help you get there. And I would argue that we can begin to break up sleep abnormalities into more than, did you fall asleep? Did you wake up early? Did you, what kinds of things bothered you? Were you perseverating? Those are the questions we've historically asked. But we can actually break sleep down into, and I just gave you the 5 big puzzle pieces, but we can subdivide these as well. Look at the middle. Are you distressed? But it doesn't matter if you reward yourself. You're reward insensitive. Right? Or look at the top right. It's high distress. It's just so high you can't deal with it. Or the top left. You're actually not in distress at all, but you're highly reactive to things in the environment. So you begin to parse out why you personally are having an issue, and then with the data that's your personal data compared to everybody else, people your age, your gender, your race, and your country. How do you compare to them? You now start to figure out what your problems are. Maybe you're not going to sleep well in the winter in some countries because no one else does, or vice versa. These are the opportunities we have. And if we're thoughtful about it, we'll be able to use this bold approach. We'll give you the right intervention for every sleeper, right? Because we're not the same. Some of us want different temperatures. And by the way, if you fight with the people that you care about the temperature in your bedroom, whoever wants it colder wins. That's the crypt note answer to that. You want to be colder than 68 degrees, and many would do better under 65 degrees, which is chilly. But it's the warm sleepers that penalize the cold sleepers. And if you have a difficult time, one little hack, put socks on. Because when you put socks on, you allow your core temperature, because it feels safe, because your feet are warm, to go colder. So your body will actually chill even more. You'll hibernate more effectively. But we're all different. Maybe 68 is good enough for you. You didn't know it before. Maybe you need to go even colder than 65 degrees. Maybe 72 is perfect for you. Why guess? There's some things in life that are knowable. There's some things that are not. Why gamble when it's knowable, right? Same for noise. We have a huge amount of success with the snore tool that we have because people don't know they're snoring, not surprisingly, right? Our spouses or loved ones do. The pets know. but you don't. And then you don't deal with it because you don't always store it the same way. But I can correlate the foods you're eating, the things you're dealing with in your life with specifics around why you're snoring. Now all of a sudden you can be an adult and intervene in your own health accordingly. And there's other factors that vary in here as well. For example, gender makes a difference and ethnicity makes a difference. And we really haven't factored that in nearly as much as we should have. And if we start to put all these variables, which in retrospect made perfect sense to be important, but we've ignored, right? You would never treat cancer the way we treat sleep problems, even though not sleeping is linked to having cancer. But we would break down cancer into very specific categories and accordingly manage folks. Sleep, you're not sleeping. But think about sleep. If sleep wasn't so vital to our survival as a species, wouldn't evolution have droned it out? Right? What's the benefit of sleeping? You're lying up there, unable to defend yourself for 8 hours, a third of your life. Anything can eat you. Snakes, wild animals, insects, right? What's the benefit of that to us? Well, it better be darn good or you wouldn't keep it around. It turns out sleep is so fundamentally critical to our brain cells shrinking and allowing the washing process that allows us to both clear out toxins, but also more importantly, get down memories, that it's one of the clues we use to diagnosing mental health issues and dementia, right? It begins to get fractured in the sleep process, and then you realize that either it led to or it's caused by deeper problems in our brain. So it's not just a nice thing to have around. And let me just correct the misperception that you fall asleep. You don't. You glide into sleep. So we got to remove the guesswork from that process. And I think we can do it because not every product intervention is the same. And we don't want to be stuck in snake oil stuff. We want evidence-based solutions. And these evidence-based solutions will work if we're smart about them. If we can look at the products that are out there and actually test them with real people in real life settings and see if they work. I mean, how else are you going to test jet lag solutions? Unless you use it in people who are jet lagged. And we all know going west is easier than going east. God bless all of you who got up today who are in the wrong time zone, like me. But it's important to look at what happens when you really try an idea. So if I got a little buzzing thing in my finger, or I've got a better solution for a adjustable bed frame, or I've got the perfect melatonin combo drink, well, I should actually use it, test it, gather data, and that's what we're seeing. And Sleep Score today, as you probably announced major partnerships, and I'm going to highlight the IFF relationship, which the International Fragrance Group is a remarkable, famous group for coming up with scents that are attractive to us. But they actually have ideas that can help us sleep better. Scents that not because of it's not lavender in your nose. These are unique scents that actually affect our brains and allow us to glide into sleep. Does it work? Let's test it. We'll use it in real people in different settings, different genders, different countries, different time zones. And if it does work, we'll know who it works for. And when it doesn't work, we'll discard it. And when we have promising ideas like this and they do work, let's get the word out together. So for all you out there who are innovators, crutch on what I think will be a really cool change in 2020, a very crisp vision of how we can measure sleep. Use that to drive your own innovations, and let's get America back to sleep again. God bless you all.